Just talking about asking for it?
Yeah.
Well, I made Asking for It. It's called, can I do the whole title?
Please.
It's called Adrienne Truscott's Asking for It, a one-lady rape about comedy starring her pussy and little else. I made it in 2013 as a sort of trick. Like, I'd been performing with Tanya from the Vaudeville Sisters. We'd been performing all over and stuff, and I just got it in my head. Like, what if you could do a stand-up comedy that was all rape jokes, but not jokes about rape, but essentially satire about the ridiculous ways that we treat that topic in our culture, which perpetuates the problem. And I just thought, if I do it as stand-up comedy, essentially it's like an hour of a feminist rant against rape culture and violence, right, and the stupidity and misogyny around it, but disguised as stand-up comedy, because I really didn't want to do like the sort of preaching to the converted. I wanted to get it into different spaces. It felt like back in 2013, I know that sounds not that long ago, but no one had done an hour of rape jokes. And I also don't wear pants in it, for a bunch of reasons. One is that I felt like in the way that our culture talks about, like, there's such a long problematic history of survivors being blamed for what happens to them because they were drinking or they were wearing a miniskirt or all these ridiculous things. And so I was like, what's the most asking for it outfit I can think of, like to an absurd degree? And I was like, no pants. Like the most accessible, floozy, boozy thing I could think of. So I wear a jean jacket and high heels and no pants. And also I thought that is, it's an absurd version of an asking for it outfit, which begs the point. Like, so, well, if that's all it takes, then I should be in a lot of trouble every single night that I do the show, right? But unless there's someone else who's going to perpetuate that violence against me, actually, I can walk all over New York City pantsless. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and also it's a funny outfit. It's very funny. It's also the site of the trespass I'm talking about, so I feel like it makes people in the room really deal with that. And I knew it would sell tickets. I knew there would be outrage, it would sound like a terrible idea, and it would sell tickets, and I really wanted, like, people to come there was no reason that I found, like, ignoble for coming. If it was just to come stare at a half-naked lady, fine. Like, get them in the door, and then hopefully my jokes were funny enough or interesting enough to keep them there. And it did. Like, it was a real experiment, and a lot of, like, people in my life or whatever were like, you're doing what? That doesn't sound like a good idea. But it worked. It was an experiment, and it worked. I didn't think at the time about how long I might be doing it. Right. I was just concentrating so hard on making the show work because I did know that if I didn't get it right, it would be awful. It could be awful. Right. It could be a train wreck. Right. So I wasn't thinking about, like, the future of the show. It's just like working, trying to get it right. And then, and I thought, if I do it right and it hits the right nerve, maybe I'll do it for like 6 months or a year. And I made the whole show, even though it has projections, fits in a carry-on case. Because I was like, my thing with this show is I will do it anywhere I can, anywhere anyone asks me, bookstore, comedy clubs, like anywhere. Cheap to travel,
And you did tour it.
Yeah, tons all over the place and I still am, right. 6 years later, which is what I did not expect. Right. So, there's a real irony there that, like, I thought it would be really zeitgeisty and then sort of pass out. But, of course, sadly, it does not become irrelevant. I would love for this show to suddenly sound stale as an old cracker because things have changed enough. But weirdly, it got more and more relevant, like in preposterous ways that I don't think any of us with any sanity left imagined. Like watching a pretty much known sexual predator become the president. Watching, then nominate another known sexual predator to the Supreme Court and watch that go down. And like Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Cosby, Louis C.K., like Me Too, every fucking producer, in Hollywood. So it was just like, Trump being like the apotheosis of the worst rape joke in town, right? So like every time I would do it and I'd be like, God, I gotta like check the script, like update it. What am I gonna do to make it? And then something would happen. I was like, well, jokes write themselves, And that's like my ongoing joke is like, oh, it's a gold mine for a comic. It's a fucking nightmare for a woman, And also in doing it for 6 years, I have learned a lot about other things from doing it. And I've had really amazing conversations with survivors, students, like all sorts of people who have also asked me a lot of questions or brought up things like questioned some of my choices, like not in an aggressive way, like in a curious way. Like I remember I did the show at Cal Arts, and a young African-American student, female student, she was like, you don't wear pants in the show, and that's an interesting choice. And I was like, yeah. And she said, as a Black woman, that wouldn't feel like a safe choice for me. And we had a really interesting conversation about it, and it made me think, like, for one, there's a long history of like cis white women doing naked performance art. It's a longer history in a lot of ways, and also, I'm not quite naked. Like I always feel like I'm also dressed in the privilege of my white skin. So just like taking on questions like that, and as well as like information and material that if I included it in the show, it would be like 13 hours long, in this culture. So I made a show with a really amazing woman and director named Ellie Heyman 2 years ago. This is the first time I really worked with a director, and I felt like we worked really, really well. And then it just sort of came up like, I had sort of said to her, I don't, how much longer am I going to keep asking for it, I wonder. And I said, I'm starting to think like I should teach it to other people, like younger women than me, different non-binary performers or something. And then I just thought, because for myself as an artist and as a person in America right now, I felt like it could do more or speak to more people. Sorry. And we both got on this idea of casting the show to see how the topic of rape is dealt with somewhat differently with different lived experiences, whether that's around race or ethnicity or religion or any of those sorts of things. And also how the jokes that I wrote, like I felt I knew the jokes that I could author funnily and, to my mind, responsibly as a white woman who's a survivor and a performer, and I felt like I know how to do this, but there are things that I don't, that are also interesting and important to talk about, but I don't know that I'm the best person to speak to it. So Ellie and I just started like brainstorming how we could really stretch the platform of the show, share the platform, change it by having, there's also like a trope of like that one brave performer artist or performance artist like that does an honest, revealing show or that kind of stuff. And I just thought, particularly in talking about this kind of topic, that's often we often see like one woman in the TV camera, or one woman saying what happened to her, or so the notion that we have this like gang of people, some of whom identify as survivors, some of whom are allies, some of whom are just like people, women growing up in America. Like, you're not untouched by somewhere in the range of, sexual aggression or harassment. So, and that would just feel really powerful. It's a crazy question to ask people, like, hey, we're really interested in inviting you to be part of this show. Here's a couple things, like, it's intensely personal immediately, because while, neither Ellie nor I are so crass or careless enough to just start asking those questions, but you just sort of let people know what the show is about and why I made it. And then, are you interested? And then people have been incredibly generous, sharing various reasons why they're interested in it. And it's not necessarily because they have a first-person subjective relationship to assault. Like I said, it runs the gamut of how they relate to the topic.
Right.
And so that is this place of like kind of intense generosity of getting to know someone, like, about being in a show like that. And then talking about performing nudity and what the stakes of that are. So
Well, how many guests are coming?
Oh my gosh! Right now there's 24, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There are two main other performers So there's me, a woman named Jen Kidd from Philadelphia, who's phenomenal, and another performer named Mari Moriarty, who's also a performer. And we are sort of like the three core holding it down, and then each night there are other guests, and I'm like blown away by the people who have been like, yeah, I'll do it. I mean, we have an Episcopalian minister. I don't even know what you're supposed to say. Priest?
Yeah.
Minister.
Yeah.
Considering doing it.
Wow.
It's really the range of people showing up to do it is amazing.
It's a very topical subject, so.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Joe's has been amazing, and Ellie is really phenomenal, the way she's able to like dream a little bigger and further than I had originally about it.
Right.
And I don't know what's gonna become of this, but we're documenting it so that because it's been a pretty wild journey from me anyway, and then adding this new element feels really powerful. So.
And the show is on?
Oh my gosh, this is so terrible. It's on the 23rd, 24th, and 25th. Is that true? Oh, great. Well, those are the preview nights.
Oh.
Yeah, and then I go do this other show. I just run a little bit over a couple blocks away, and then we come back, and it actually opens on October 3rd and runs until October 13th.
Wow.
So this one's called Adrienne Truscott Still Asking for It. A stand-up about rape, starring her pussy and little else. It's slightly different. I should know the title of my own show. Yeah. A stand-up rape about comedy, starring her pussy and little else. That's right. But actually starring all these other phenomenal people, too. Yeah.
Great. So now, once you walk a few blocks away, you have another show opening at the
Skirball Center. Yeah.
Which is very exciting. It's a great theater space.
Yeah.
And tell us about that show.
Okay.
That's a whole different ballgame.
That is a whole different ballgame. That is a very cheeky show, and I mean that literally and figuratively. So probably for like the last 10 years, I've performed overseas, probably more than in New York. The Vaudeville sisters are the vaudevillian duo that Tanya Gagne and I have done for over 15 years. We started doing like Edinburgh Fringe, and then we met these amazing people from Australia, and we got into this whole fringe circuit, which allows you to like self-produce and just keep working, and in a way that is not possible in this country quite the same way. So we just like not meaning to, we sort of like became quasi-Australian and we're just working there for like a decade. Wow. Like back and forth, we lived here still. Wow. And we've both met amazing people over there and forged really amazing friendships as well as like art relationships, so two people that I've met from that over the years, Ursula Martinez, who is from London, and Zoe Coombs-Marr, who is from Sydney. The three of us make a similar kind of work, or, we're interested in similar things. We tend to undermine form and experiment the same way. We all tend to make kind of provocative choices, whether they're nudity or drag or, and yeah, we started, I got this title in my head, Wild Boar, but B-O-R-E. And I found it to be a very funny title. And I thought, that's a great title for something. At first I thought it was going to be a band. But anyway, the three of us, we were talking actually, not before we ever started talking about making a piece. In this way at Fringe festivals, you do like 25 shows in a row. You get reviewed constantly. Sometimes you get reviewed by really thoughtful, brilliant people. And sometimes you get reviewed by some like schmo who just got free tickets in exchange for an online review. Right. And they don't know a fucking thing, Right. And we would get to the artist bar and have a couple of drinks, and we would often share our particular war stories of like, you won't believe what this guy said. And we found that, while it's one thing to like work or not like work, that's fine, but there was very particular things happening about particular kinds of performance, which included us, which was like queer, experimental, feminist stuff was just really and truly not being seen. Like a guy could show up with his pad and paper ready to go, but from the review, you could just tell that like from the minute they walked in the door, they'd already made up their mind. They already thought they knew what they were seeing. They didn't really open their eyes. Right. They didn't really engage. They didn't give us the benefit of the doubt that we knew what we were doing. Right. Like literally. The reviews would literally say things like, for no apparent reason, so-and-so does this. And you're like, you have to decide every single thing that you do in a theater, Yeah. Like, sure, there's lazy work where people don't tend to things, but for no apparent reason. And so we decided to do this thing because we were like, oh, well, we're known as rule breakers and that's a rule, right? Like, don't respond to your critics. And we just started interrogating, well, who made that rule? Critics, basically, And we just sort of were like, who is that rule really serving? Because if you're an artist who works really hard and makes really interesting work and actually does feel misunderstood, and that stuff actually, it slows or speeds or stops your career and your opportunities. And it's like, if you feel misunderstood and you don't say anything because you're not supposed to, and it seems whinging, then you're just silenced. And your critic, right or wrong, misogynist or not, gets the last word. And if you do speak up, you're considered sort of like whiny or like, let the work speak for itself. And it can, but if someone is like decided not to listen, it can't speak for itself. Or we just said, fuck it. What happens if we break that rule? And then as we were thinking about that, we were thinking about being boring because we're like, God damn it, we make really entertaining shows, but maybe the most feminist thing in the world to do would be to just be sort of existential and boring, like a lot of theater by men. So, and then I was like, Wild Boar. I was like, I've had this thing in my head that there was something about it that was really like electric to me. And I was like, what if we're wildly boring? Like, what is a show that is wildly boring? How do you become wildly boring? Like, it's such a weird balance, and like finding what that is felt like a really fun project for all of us. So that became the name, Wild Boar, and we decided we would make a show responding to our critics. And what we've done essentially is make a found script. So the entire script, pretty much, give or take a little tweaking here or there, comes from existing reviews. Some from our own work, and some of other work like ours that also gets treated this way. And then some from just those juicy reviews like by Rex Reed that you're like, I'm glad someone made that awful, awful play so that Rex Reed had a reason to let his outrage out in this unbelievable acrobatic language that is hilarious.
Wow.
That almost begs the point, is there any such thing as bad theater if it can produce such a hilarious review? So we have a lot of fun with it. It is sort of like asking for it. It is addressing something serious at its core, but it's a really goofy, bonkers way of addressing it.
Nice.
Yeah.
And the other ladies in the show are from where?
Ursula Martinez is from London. She's amazing. She's a maker and performer and director. And Zoe Coombs-Marr is from Sydney. And she is a comedian and maker and amazing human.
And the show is at the
Skirball Center, right?
The dates
on NYU campus. The date of those shows are September 27th and 28th, with 2 on the 28th. It's such a good show. Oh, train, I know.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.